Arman and Zoya had been married for nearly a decade, and though their love had started like a bright fire, it had slowly turned into quiet embers that no longer glowed as they once did, and life had surrounded them with responsibilities, work deadlines, unpaid bills, and expectations that never seemed to end. And somewhere between the long hours at the office and the countless chores at home, they had lost the sound of laughter they once shared so easily, and yet deep inside, both of them carried the memory of who they used to be, the young couple who would stay awake until dawn, whispering dreams into each other's ears, promising adventures and building castles in the air. But as time passed, those castles fell into dust, and what remained were walls of silence and unspoken words. And Zoya often wondered if love could die, not in storms but in silence. One evening when the rain tapped gently against their windows, she sat alone, staring at the drops racing down the glass, and she whispered to herself, almost as if her heart could hear more than her ears. "Arman, do you remember the nights we used to plan our future together? Do you remember how you once told me that no matter what happened, you would always keep our love alive?" But her words dissolved in the empty room as Arman sat across the table, lost in the glow of his laptop, chasing numbers that seemed more alive to him than her presence. And that night, Zoya's heart cracked. Not because of anger, but because of loneliness. And so she decided that if she could not speak to him with her voice, she would speak to him with her words. And she wrote him a letter, not of blame, but of longing, telling him how she missed the man who once made her laugh until her stomach hurt, how she missed the nights when they dreamed of children and journeys and a home filled with warmth. And she placed the letter quietly in his briefcase, hoping he would find it in the middle of his busy day. And when Arman opened it during his lunch break, the words struck him harder than any silence ever had, because he realized that in his endless pursuit of a better future, he had abandoned the very present that made life worth living. And he remembered their wedding night, her eyes full of trust and hope, her hands trembling slightly as he placed the ring on her finger, and he wondered with shame, when was the last time he had looked at her with the same devotion? So that evening he returned home early, carrying her favorite flowers with a nervous heart. And when she opened the door, he said nothing. At first he only placed the flowers on the table and pulled her close, and in a trembling whisper he said, "I forgot Zoya. I forgot that before everything else, before money and success and respect. You were my first dream, and you are still my only dream." And her tears fell not out of sorrow but of relief, because in those words she heard the man she had been waiting to hear for years. And from that night onwards, they began to rebuild their love, not through grand gestures, but through little things like putting away their phones at dinner, taking long walks, holding hands again, leaving small notes on the mirror, and slowly the silence lifted like fog, clearing from a valley, revealing the sunlight beneath. And they laughed again, sometimes softly, sometimes loudly, and in those moments they realized that marriage was not about never falling into silence, but about choosing again and again to break that silence together. And years later, when their hair had turned gray and their children had grown, they would look back on that night when a simple letter saved their love and remember that true marriage is not built in the absence of problems, but in the presence of promises kept alive every single day.